What's up, everybody? Believe it or not, I have a review here from Drazen. This is about 5.5 pages worth. This is basically his review for Sonic the Hedgehog issue number 236. Just came out, obviously. Now, this is what he says. First of all, he talks about the cover. He says basically that this is he basically says this is about. He puts Tracy Yardlin, he says, Tracy Yardlin with an exclamation point, cover. And this is what he says about it. He says, now this is more like it, campers. You have a single character, Sonic, in a simple yet bold design. It recalls any number of classic designs from recruiting posters and propaganda art from various cultures. The upraised arm is a recurring element in many of these. Well, that is certainly enough to commend this cover. Tracy Yardlin uses oversized half-tone dots to remind the reader of how comics were colored in the old-school comic book medium. He especially draws inspiration from the oversized pop art comic panels of Roy Linsington dating back to the 1960s, and all using only 5 colors. It just goes to show that when you start with a strong design, you don't need to use every crayon in the box. This one rides the bullet to best cover art of 2012, and it would take a miracle to dislodge it. Now, basically, here's his review for issue 236, released in June of this year. Not 2010, 2012. He put 2010 by accident, but this is his review for this issue, Cry Freedom, of issue 236, and this is what he says. Now, he already talked about who the story is by. It's by Ian Flynn, art by Tracy, ink by Terry, color by Matt, lettering not available, assistant editor Vincent Loverow, editor Paul Kaminsky, editor-in-chief Victor Golik, artistic design Mike Parento, and Sega licensing Anthony Gucci and Cindy Chow. Whatever. I'll provide the link to this review in case you guys can't understand maybe a word I say. But this is what he talked. This is his review, and I quote: After a page of bringing the reader up to date, we get Eggman demonstrating his chops by supplying 2 more pages of exposition while launching the conquest of Furville, which, based on the mission-style architecture, appears to be located south of Los Angeles. Turns out despite the reset that started this mess, the baddies need to put in somewhere for some R&R, repair, and restocking. The fact that Ian Flynn has to resort to no less than 5, capitalized as 5, footnotes is an indication of how deep the snow has gotten since the story started. While Eggman is complaining about there being too many heroes underfoot, Sonic isn't getting any traction in light of what's happened, so he's still in Achilles' sulk mood. Okay, wait a minute. Sonic isn't getting any traction in light of what's happened, so he's still in Achilles' sulk mood. Just then, Amy, Rose, and Tails barge in and tell him what he and the readers already know. Then they figure out the best way to motivate Sonic is to yell at him about how he hasn't been a quitter before, and they're not going to let him start now. But while Sonic admits he doesn't have a plan B on the drawing board, Rhoda shows up to announce his resignation to the council and Nicole's off-site storage. So while they're still circling the problem, Furville is being overrun, and the local resistance isn't proving to be very effective. So far, the most that's inspired, other than fear in the populace, is good humor in Eggman. Back at the council, Rhoda shows up with Sonic singing backup to spell out his surveillance package. His severance package. He'll command his B team members as yet unnamed, while wearing the Wolverine yellow suit. Noggins can't exactly deny the council a shot at voting on the measure, so he plays along. And now let's get a look at the players on Team Fighters. At this point, Team Fighters consist of Sonic, Amy Rose, Tails, and T-Pup. Meanwhile, news of this development reaches Eggman via a bug in the council chambers. Yes, it's been 12 issues since the recon, and apparently Sonic and the gang haven't really let it sink in that Eggman and Naugus are in cahoots. At least until Eggman leaves his microphone open and blurts out his surprise all over Furville, enough time has passed. By the way, for Mechasal to be less impressive, and for Sonic to be less intimidated by her presence. As the tide of battle begins to turn, which says more about Eggman's army than about Team Fighters, Sal gets recalled and everybody else is abandoned. So it's left to Sonic and the crew to pick up the pieces. Okay, that's his review for this. This is what he says. Now, to remind people about how he does this, he does a head score, he does a eye score, and he does a heart score. Basically, all scored around 10 points. So if he scores each category with 10, then he said that's basically his way of saying this is a great issue, all the way around. But if he scores it less than that, well, it was either average or not good. So let's see what he has to give for a head score. This is his head score. And he starts out by saying this. Seriously, you think anyone needs a Who's Who's feature to remind them of who the major players are in this comic? Especially since these characters have been hanging together for the last 2 decades? Anybody think we're getting so many newbies a month that they need something like this? Anybody? One thing I'm afraid of is that the answer could be maybe in a few months. I'm afraid of this is that the answer could be maybe in a few months' time. If the plot of this story balloons out of control, this may indeed become necessary. And the second page of the story drives the point home. It's bad enough, as already stated, that the story needed 5 text blocks on one page to cover all the backstory bases, but squeezing them and dialogue onto the page makes the layout look like some punk zine from the 80s. And it all takes place on a page where nothing else in particular happens. And when things do happen, they do so in a way that makes you ask, what just happened? The pages where Tails and Amy essentially browbeat Sonic into getting off his tail and doing something just didn't work for me. The actors came in and hit their marks and spoke their lines, and Rhoda's entrance was just as forced and contrived. It's like nobody fired off one brain cell during the whole segment. I was also going to point out that the emotional content of the scene was also running on fumes, but I'll save that for the heart section. The only halfway decent segment was where Furville was being overrun, and Ian Flynn basically told Tracy Arlen, "You're on your own. Call it Postcards from the Battlefield." And of course, there are the fight scenes. Sing along if you remember. The Eggbots show up and terrorize the locals. Then the heroes show up. Then Mechasal arrives. Then for some reason, Eggman calls it all off and moves on to the next venue. Yes, it fits in with the action and more action credo. But it's beginning to look like the same action and more action over and over again. Even the jokes are beginning to sound alike. The only new development is Rhoda and his "look at me, I'm dressed like Wolverine" suit. Then there's the blink and you'll miss it council scene, where the remaining council members do their best to ignore Naugus. For this part, the Wiz at least keeps his power trip in check when he could very well have adjourned the council to the nearest suite of dungeons. I don't know why this hasn't happened yet. It certainly would have earned Naugus some serious badass points. Again, aside from restructuring the Freedom Fighters, you had Eggman threatening the village Well, the event that should have been the centerpiece of this installment, the rollout of the latest Freedom Fighter incarnation after Sonic decides to get back in the game, was fighting for the reader's attention with everything else going on. Head score 5. And again, I'll provide a link down below. Head score 5. So basically, he gives it a 5 out of 10 on the head score. The eye score. Tracy Yardlin does good work. Eye score, which is artistic work. Tracy Yardlin does good artwork, but it's just so off when Sonic, Tails, and Amy get together. There's too much jokingly broad winks to one another. And while it matches up with the repertoire supplied by Ian Flynn, the question is whether it should have been there in the first place. I score 8. So far, 5 out of 10, 8 out of 10, 13 out of 20. Heart. Okay, here's the heart score. There's been some chattering on the net amongst Sonic fans that the 250 reset will possibly obliterate all remaining traces of the SATM continuity. Swell. But as I've asked each time the subject comes up, what will it be replaced with? Sonic rekindling his romance with Elise? The SATM continuity worked and people could relate to it. That's the short answer as to why it's still on the radar. And it's not as if you had to be a genius to follow it. The original Freedom Fighters were a bunch of teenagers in hiding, waging a guerrilla war against a despondent society, under the heel of Dr. Robotnik. Sonic was no superhero battling single-handedly like Captain America or James Bond. His being partnered with Sally wasn't just a romance of convenience. The writers for the show recognized that while Sonic was speed and snark, his being paired with the level-headed Sally balanced him out and made the fight more effective. I got the same vibe when Silver shared screen time with Blaze. Some couples just work so well that they should be left alone. I mention this because if the story is any kind of forecast of what's to come with Team Freedom and Team Fighters, not an inspired choice of names, in my opinion, it's going to be pathetic. It feels as if Ian took the concept of the Sonic Heroes video game, tossed them in a bag, then drew it out at random. Thus we have Sonic and Tails and Amy pretty much reenacting the Sonic Heroes dialogue and shtick, except there's more weird interplay between Sonic and Amy. Amy, and this is what he quotes him, Amy, less banter, more saving folks. Sonic, will you quit nagging? Amy, I'm not nagging. I don't know whether Archer Editorial was afraid that Sonic and Sally's romance would overshadow other aspects of the comic, but I'm not sure that having Sonic and Amy go into the old married couple mode is any improvement. This is especially true if Amy's physical shtick is almost totally defined by her Pico hammer. Emotionally, this should have been an issue to consolidate all of the loss, the sorrow, to ball it up into such intense feeling that it bleeds off the page, and which then moves the heroes to the next action. Instead, we waste Sonic on a Scourge flashback, waste Tails and Amy on favoring Sonic with the Captain Oblivious imitations, or Captain Obvious imitations, I should say, and fill up the page with as little genuine emotion as possible before moving on to the next battle. Man, this just didn't work at all. Hot score 3, and I'm being generous. In other words, it could have been lower. So, basically, for the main story, you have 5 out of 10 for the hit score, 8 out of 10 for the 8 out of 10 for the art score, and 3 out of 10 for the heart score, basically. So overall, he gave it a 16 out of 30. And believe me, that's bad. Alright. Okay, well basically we have the backup story as well. The backup story is leader of the band And basically he talks about how Rotor is in the middle of a recruitment drive for people to be part of Team Freedom. So basically, overall, for those that maybe know about this, Team Freedom ends up consisting of Heavy and Bomb rebuilt, a rebuilt Heavy and Bomb, and as he puts it, Team Cute veterans, Cream, Cheese, and Big. And he talks about how the tail star disintegrates the corner of a building to keep it from being bored to death, and basically gives Team Freedom a chance to, well, blow up the building on their own, though they've never used the term controlled demolition. Well, Naugus is distracted by his inner wizards. Nicole for the Armada or something. Nicole or the Armada or somebody. Okay. This is what he says about it. Basically he says, well, there are all 5 pages I'll never get back. We have lots of exposition punctuated by the kind of superhero action you can't get anywhere. Airlift those extras. Blow up the building. Blow up that building. There's no time to check if anybody might have actually been inside. Good things, the building's empty and we need one more page. The prerogative in this case is the Tails doll, making its first real appearance outside the off-panel section. And not wanting to be bored to death is as much as a motivation in this case as anything else. The problem with ejecting Tails doll into this storyline is that he can make things happen with no rhyme or reason required. This isn't the first time a villain has been brought in to add some arbitrary weirdness. I've seen this happen with Macthalith in Superman and Discord in My Little Pony Friendship and Magic. But at least when Discord puts in an appearance, we're talking about series entertainment value. 2 words, chocolate rain. Now I can appreciate civic destruction via arbitrary disintegration as much as the next guy. Okay. Now I can appreciate civic destruction via arbitration disintegration as much as the next guy, but it worked way better in Eureka 7 than it did here. All that happened here was it gave Rhoda an excuse to put his people to work, and Naugus isn't much use either. His dialogue with Rhoda just barely rouses the threat level when the Tails doll steals what's up to the show. And without Tracy Yarden stepping in to help Naugus' arguments with his alter egos, the gimmick loses steam. Head score for the backup story, head score 1 out of 10. The I score, he says, if the art in this story could be described in one word, the word would be claustrophobia. There's so little room to draw breath between the characters, and it's a wonder they get off as much dialogue as they do. And even when Tails does wreck a building to goose up the action, the frames still suffer from overcrowding. I score 7 out of 10, so that's so far 8 out of 20. Heart score. It all belongs to the scene where the Tails dog threatens to drop a building on the extras. There's a lot of pointless dashing about, and Naugus is no help. And Naugus' political act begins to lose its luster. That's easy enough to see when he runs out of answers and starts looking for scapegoats instead. I suppose his next step will be to impose more authorizing control